So welcome, everyone. We are so thrilled to have George Robert III here with us. And I found this really great quote. I'm reading this wonderful, wonderful book that I highly suggest if you have any children. This is good for middle school children up to through adulthood. It's called Secret Self-Made Millionaires Teach Their Kids. And this one is about, and the reason I picked this is because George is speaking about crossroads. Wealth is nonlinear. So there's linear thinking and nonlinear thinking. And the quote is creating linear solutions will make you a living. Creating nonlinear solutions will make you rich. I thought that was fun. Oh, who spoke this one? Oh, it's anonymous. Oh, it's probably by Steve Seibold. Uh, this great book. I'm reading it because there's always room to learn. So are you going to share your screen today, George?
You bet. Let me do that right now.
Okay, so George has been, and I'm sorry I didn't pull up your background, but because I know you've been in this business for years and years and years in apartment complexes, also known as multifamily. He is one of the experts in this field. He has a lot of knowledge and he is going to give us some we're just in this really strange time, which I have never seen, and this is my fifth or sixth time through this. I've never seen where people just have pulled back and stopped. Maybe they did in the 50s and 60s, but beyond that, things pivoted and changed. But this kind of a stop, I haven't seen it since one of our wars that we had back in the 70s when Mr. Reagan was in office. So, George, thank you very much for coming, and please take it away.
All right, absolutely. I just want to make sure everybody sees the main screen, not my note screen, but either way,
Well, we
I
see
guess.
investing in uncertain times.
All right, okay. So, well, you started with a quote, and I'll start with a quote as well, Peggy. So, this one from Sun Tzu. In the midst of chaos, there is opportunity, and there is certainly chaos these days. Well,
Agreed.
there's my little namesake there. All right. So I think what's on a lot of people's minds right now is mortgage rates because that's really been running the show for the last few years. I've got a couple of data sets here. We've got the historical mortgage rates up through the 1950s. This is from NBER. And I also have some more longer range data here. And you're going to see that, we really are not experiencing terribly high interest rates now by any historical standards. Around 7% would be around the long-term average. Take a look at some more recent data here. You see we've coming back down from some very high peaks last year. And of course, this has allowed prices, particularly in the residential sector, to start a pretty nice recovery. I'll just zoom out one last time and show you the Freddie Mac data, which goes back to 1971. It gives us an idea that, yes, I mean, we've certainly been in some very, very high interest rate territory before. Something very important to remember is that although we do think we are at the end or the peak of the interest rate cycle, that it takes a long time for the Fed to sort of put its foot on the gas again. So you'll see these plateaus are lasting on average about 8 months, and this data is going back to the 1980s. So we didn't stop hiking that long ago. We have to expect that probably be a little bit longer, could be quite a while before we see that much awaited rate cut.
So this is based on what's going on with inflation, based on the mortgage rate. Is that what these two lines are?
Yeah, so we've got the federal funds effective rate and showing that it usually takes the Fed quite a while to decide that inflation has actually been quelled. But what I'm really trying to show here is remember the fact that we just don't expect those rate cuts to come right away. It
Mhm.
usually takes quite a while, and in some cases, a very long while after the last hike. All right. Well, again, I think that most people are quite aware of what's going on with the rates. Of course, that's what we live in every day. Just wanted to make sure we had a much longer historical view. I mean, again, remember we have also seen some very low rates too. Uh, I would say most recently, not very recently, in the 1950s. So what we've seen over the last 10 years seeing rates get down to, I want to say, an all-time low in the mid twos. Talking about residential rates here, to be clear, was pretty amazing. Now, again, you might wonder why am I talking about residential when I think most people here are interested in commercial, but two markets are always very tightly connected. Consider that economics is the study of scarce resources with alternative uses and whether people are going to live in a single family home or an apartment at the end of the day, we need a certain number of units. And I'll get into that housing report in a moment. But I just wanted to show you the affordability here and help people understand that this affordability right now is really unsustainable. We're taking a look at the home price divided by the median income. And we're used to seeing that settle out somewhere between, maybe 4 or 5. But because we haven't been building recently, we've seen it stretch almost to 8. And we know that this can't persist forever, but the only way to get out of it is to sort of build our way out. All right.
Mm.
Make sure, do I? Yeah.
Well, I thought that we were not at 8 million anymore. Didn't we come down from that?
Oh, this is just the home price to uh, income ratio here.
Okay, I was just looking
Yes,
at lagging 8 million units,
exactly.
but
Now, I
they,
think I did have my things backwards. Now, tell me now, you're looking at the big screen now, correct?
yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, I had a feeling I saw some people looking very closely at the screen. So
Well,
let's add it up. So we have at least 8 million, I would say, missing units here. If it takes a little bit, maybe above 1.5 million units per year that need to be built so that we can house a growing nation, yeah, you'd have to say that added up since that Great Recession, we are just way, way, way behind. Now, what I'd like to do next is take a look at this very commonly known data, but I'd like to walk through it in a visual way. So if we go back to 1968, which is when we started rigorously tracking the number of housing units that have been made per year, this is where we get our long run average of 1.5 million. So if we add up all the bars below 1.5 million, during the first housing cycle, which continued on until 1971, you see that we were behind this long run average by about 372,000. So you'll see the construction tracker here is going to go from 0 down to negative 372,000. Now, over the next 46 months, we added 1.5 million above this long term trend. So that's about 1 year's worth of construction. During the following housing cycle, which ended in 1977, 24 months, we were below the line by about 325,000. So that'll take us down to positive 854,000. So I think we can go through a little faster. You get the idea. These housing cycles never really get us ahead or
Mm-mm.
behind by more than about 1.5 million units. And that's going to hold true until we get to the Great Recession here. And when we get to the Great Recession, you're going to see that for the very, very first time, we have gotten just extraordinarily far behind. And that's this current cycle has been going on now for almost, let me see where it stops here. I want to say 198 months currently. 198 months. Uh, you notice we have very few blue bars here. Again, blue bars representing times at which we're building over the 1.5 million per year mark. So let's take us up to the very present month, and you'll see that now we have finally had a great month. February rang in at 1.73 million completions. So that's huge. 1 month, of course, isn't going to get us out of this. We've got to build millions of units to get us out of the soup. And with just essentially one data point significantly above 1.5 million, it's hard to say whether we can expect that in the future that we're going to see us really actually even building our way out of it. Again, we're just beginning. I'd be very excited in about 2 weeks to see the very next housing report and see if we are again above the line. So here's another interesting perspective on the housing market. This is the change in how.
I'm sorry, excuse me, George. I think we're looking at your side line. We need to make this one bigger so people can really see it better.
Wait a second. Did I have that backwards? Oops. I disconnected display. Unfortunately, let me try it again.
I'm sorry I interrupted.
No. It's good. It's good. Let's make sure we got the right one here. Okay.
Well, we were looking at the right one, but the next one coming up was showing, so I thought that was your sidebar.
Okay. Got it. Let me just reshare again. All right, boom. Yeah, that should be the big one. All right, we got to back up. All right.
Okay, there we
go.
So
this is the change in housing starts from the start of the rate hiking cycle. So as you see, every time we hike rates, okay, so let me set up the chart here. So 0% is the number of starts that we have at the start of the hiking cycle, okay? As we hike, we have always traditionally seen rates, we've seen the number of housing starts significantly decline. Now, what's different this time? Well, this time we are just so far behind that we really couldn't stop building. We also know, though, that banks right now are tightening. They've got a lot of issues with reserves, and some of their loans are going bad. We have lower deposits, and banks are not really in a position to continue lending like they have in the past. Construction, of course, being an industry that is very heavily dependent on the price of capital. So at some point, we could expect that we'll be back into the negative territory. And that means that it will take potentially a very, very long time to get back to parity with our housing units. Oops. All right, here's an idea what happens to the housing completions during recession. So we still haven't had a real recession since the Great Recession. This last recession lasting about a couple of months. I don't know if somebody needs to go on mute. Maybe you can handle that, Peggy. So you see, during most recessions, we see a significant decline in the number of housing completions, with there being 3 minor exceptions to that rule. It could get worse. Now, of course, we know that recessions don't mean falling prices. And out of the last 6 recessions, home prices have actually increased 4 out of 6 times. Of course, the one outlier being the Great Recession, where home prices declined more than they advanced across almost all of the other recession timeframes. Okay, so I did mention that economics is a study of scarce resources with alternative uses. Again, you can live in a single family or a multifamily, doesn't really matter that much. At the end of the day, people need housing units, and building more of one is necessarily going to have an impact on the price of the other. But how good is this correlation? I've heard people say that, you can really just look at residential, don't worry too much about it. But I have never seen anybody quantify the correlation between prices in the single family and the multifamily space. So that's what I've done here. I've taken the Freddie Mac multifamily index versus the Freddie Mac single family price index. And overall, the R squared or Pearson correlation is very high, 92%. But I also noticed that it's worst. Here, let me go back to that. It's worst at times of inflection. So over here during the Great Recession, and then again during the COVID pandemic timeframe, or I should say the post-COVID timeframe, where we saw extraordinary rate hikes, the correlation actually becomes relatively poor. So I would say that if you don't live in one of the, I believe, 25 or so cities that Freddie Mac tracks for multifamily, that you may want to take a look at the single family data, but you have to take it with a very strong grain of salt because this data is likely to abandon you when you need it the most. Especially here where the multifamily is plummeting versus single family roughly holding steady. Now I'd like to introduce the Freddie Mac Multifamily Index. Amy, this is the Apartment Investors Multifamily Index. And what it does here is the higher it is, the better, supposedly, it is to invest in multifamily. So you see as the prices increased tremendously during the Great Recession. The AMI index here in green is going down as the prices fell, became a better time to invest again. So we've got multiple things. That's what I love about Freddie Mac is they're tracking the price index, the NOI index, and mortgage rates and rolling that all into one. So I would highly recommend heading out to Freddie Mac. Take a look at this data. You can also take a look at the primary mortgage market survey every Thursday, give you an idea where the residential market is headed. Well, I'd also like to take a quick look at various cities in the various sections of our country. So here in the Northeast, you get some idea that Northeast is, reasonably tracking the national index. You do see perhaps a little bit more volatility. Southeast, again, we got the Midwest, which is, of course, there's only two cities here. We've got Chicago and Minneapolis, but very tight to the national index. And then we have the West, which shows a great deal of dispersion. Depending on when you invest out in some of these more volatile states, you could have done either very well or very, very poorly. Now I've taken a look at volatility several ways. Again, this is the Freddie Mac multifamily index. Appreciation from 2000 to the global financial crisis, appreciation from 2000 to the post-GFC trough. Okay, so here's the beginning of the GFC, and this is where prices bottom out. This is the fall from the GFC. So in other words, the peak just before the crisis hit to the trough, and so on and so forth. So, we can sort of delve into this. I don't know if there's any cities that people are particularly interested in, but go find your market, and this will give you some idea of how volatile your market is over various time frames. And again, if you can't find your market here, another great place to go is to Fred, and you can go find the single family price indexes. And then I've done this over various sections of the country. This is just showing that home price appreciation generally tracks inflation, although I got a better figure for you right here. So we have the core CPI, so that's excluding the food and energy prices. And what I've done is I've taken that and superposed that over RealPage's data, which is showing US residential rent growth. So you're going to see there are many years, for example, in the inflationary 1970s, where you would have seen core CPI outrun your rent increases. But on average, it's pretty amazing. It just sort of rides right through the peaks and the troughs. Very, very good hedge against inflation. So again, I think we all know that, but again, how often are we seeing people actually quantify this? Showing the length of historical rate cycles from the beginning of the hike all the way up through the peak and the plateau. I think I'm going to kind of skip through that because we did talk about this uh, recently, or I'm sorry, just a moment ago. So now I'd like to talk about affordability. I highlighted Ohio here. One of the issues we've had is that over the last few years, we've seen rents have gone up like crazy and income hasn't. So a lot of places are getting rent constrained. But Ohio is one of the places that I like because it's relatively affordable. I also like Kentucky. I like East Tennessee. These are some places that tend to have a relatively low rent to income ratio. Let's see. Yeah, we've talked about affordability. I think we could talk about migration too. But I also know, Peggy, you like to save some time for questions. So maybe we'll just do one last topic, and then I'd love to open it up, and that way we can have a great discussion. So this is showing you some of the areas that people are migrating to, and you're seeing that there is a great increase in
Yeah.
income due to new migrants in many of the places that people are buying apartments, like Florida, the Texas Triangle. You got Texas, North Carolina. Sorry, I said Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia here. Uh,
Florida.
Good. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Is that you, Peggy?
I was just looking at Florida was inundated with new.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. I mean, people are moving to Florida all the time. Prices are up like crazy. I've got two apartments in Florida, and I got to say, I'm really happy for the tailwinds that I've experienced. Not so sure that I can count on that in the future. It's a little harder to buy there now than it was maybe 3 or 4 years
A
ago.
lot harder. Yeah, but look at Maine. That's kind of
Yeah.
away going north. Ohio, we know there's a lot of industry going on there, but Maine, you never hear about Maine at all. But look at people are moving there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Northeast and Midwest, I think in many ways could be some of the better places to invest in. Haven't heard a lot about them before, I would say maybe 2022, 2023, but nowadays people are really hankering for those steady Eddie investments. And these are some places where you might find them.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah. And again, here's our Sun Belt leading the population growth, but scary though. We're also seeing some pretty huge price appreciation. So the question always remains, does it make sense to continue to buy? I mean, we have seen some reversals in our country, particularly in places like Idaho. Wow, Southern Idaho has seen some major pain for people who have bought out there. Taking a quick look at the U-Haul top growth states, this data is getting a little older. Hopefully, we'll get some new data here soon. But again, some of the same winners, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, these states tend to be in the top three, top 10. And it happens again. Oh, yeah, probably interesting to look at the change. Just pretty amazing to see how things changed 2021 to 2022. Some of these jumping up hugely, right? So it was Texas, Florida, Tennessee in 2021. And then by 2022, we see already, particularly North Carolina and Virginia, just, jumping up like nuts. So it never hurts to get the freshest data. It's hard. There's many different ways you can get it. There's U-Haul, there's the van lines, and many other people keep estimates, etc. But and this okay. So first of all, we're showing the top ranked states for growth, and
Mhm.
here I've arranged the data in terms of the fastest movers. So here we see Virginia, Alabama, Missouri, Pennsylvania. So these are places that are attracting population quicker than they had in the past, or at least, this may be compared to population loss in the prior measurement. But again, places where things are getting better rapidly. So I would characterize this as the slide that has places that are good now, and these are your potential future movers. Well, with that, I've got a lot of other slides, and I would love to delve in. If we got some questions, I might go grab those. But I think instead, what we're going to do is I'll invite my namesake over here, or my alter ego, the data scientist of real estate, and have him help me answer some questions.
All right, great, George. That's really great. Okay, so I know he went through this fairly fast, and for some of you, it might be a little confusing, and for Ted, it put him right to sleep. So, uh-huh. Yeah, well, there's three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. So, but I have several questions about this, which might spark other people's questions. Um, so we're still talking about the 8 million units that are needed for people to live. And yet in LA, it's still taking 4 years to get approval to build. And I know that's going on in other cities where it used to be easier. Now it's taking longer. So the cities really don't care about having the growth, would you say? Because it's really frustrating for the developers that they can't get something through and for it to take ridiculously 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah, tell me about it. I mean, my family's in building. I wish my sister was here to opine on this. I'm sure she'd have a lot of eloquent things to say. Uh, I don't know if they don't care. A lot of people think politicians don't understand. I'm not sure I believe that. They're out for votes. And to be tough on developers or tough on the rich, so to speak, it's very popular. So I think that they know what they're doing. There are some places where there has been some change, like in California now, they're allowing accessory dwelling units. Seems kind of maybe a bit extreme solution to the problem. I don't know how that stuff is going to age in 10, 15 years, what it's going to look like to have all those ADUs popping up everywhere. But I'm 100% with you, Peggy. I think that making it a little bit easier to build. I mean, I think we all go through that. I mean, whether you're doing ground up construction or just doing renovation, the amount of time that it can take to get permits and to do things right, it can be ridiculous.
And then the requirements like, oh, you had a typo here, so we want $1,000 more for you to resubmit the word corrected like that. So
Right.
I don't know. I don't understand that, but
Well, here's another one. How about a development that requires 8 foot sidewalks, even though they're connecting to ordinary sidewalks? Well, what difference does that make? How does that help any? But it's the new standard, and forcing 8 foot wide sidewalks because that's supposed to make our community more walkable.
oh yeah,
Maybe,
they all want that. No,
yeah, they
you have parking anymore because they want people to be on their bicycles and they want people to not have cars. So now you don't have to supply even one space per unit, much less two, right? Anyway, so and then so you were also talking about some of the apartments being in a lot of trouble right now. And this has just always been a major complaint on my part, and that is the banks don't ever make sure that the syndicator is putting the deal together correctly, which would protect them, the banks. And I don't understand why telling somebody they have to bring in more money doesn't protect either the bank or the syndicator that's not putting their deal together correctly to me. And I don't know how to get through to the banks. They keep changing over, so you're never talking to the same people. But I did notice that you've got to make sure that you're bringing in the right cap rates off of the NOI. And that hasn't happened in the last, what, 10, 12, 20 years?
yeah, I see we got a thumbs up on that. Here. Yeah, it's very difficult to put together a deal these days without negative leverage. It's really put a damper on deals. I know you mentioned that at the very outset when you were making. Thank you for the introduction, by the way. It's kind of crazy to see just the way that uh, the transaction volume just dropped off a cliff. And I
Uh-huh.
think we're returning a little bit, but it's nowhere like what we see or saw, 12 to, or maybe 18 to 24 months ago.
Yeah, well, and they want to listen to people that have experience, these young people, because, they know it all. Um,
True of every generation.
in the 70s, when I was very young and having a lot of fun. And I was not in this business. Two things I noticed was what that you brought up is I never had a problem finding an apartment to live in for wherever time I was going to be, wherever I was going to be. It could be DC or somewhere in Virginia. Actually, I've lived in Pennsylvania, Ohio, DC area, all over the country pretty much. And another thing that was happening at that same time was the schools were closing because people were not having children, and yet there was a shortage of housing. I thought that was kind of interesting when you brought that up because there wasn't a, I mean, I didn't ever hear, when you're not in that business, you're not paying that much attention, but I didn't really hear about any housing shortage. But the schools, I was in the DC, Virginia area at the time, and the schools, they were closing elementary schools right and left. I think they closed over 50% of the elementary schools because women went into the workforce in the 70s. They weren't having kids, they were having careers. It changed the whole dynamics of the United States in actuality.
Sure do.
It did. So, Johnny, you have a question, and then I have another question then I actually have a question for George.
Yeah, a lot of data here, George. A lot of different topics, affordability and whatnot. But as I sit here and think, right, we have a finite amount of land in the United States, right, and we have areas where people like to live, right, the MSAs, the urban areas where people like to live. We called it in the auto industry the smiles, right? Down the West Coast through Texas and the Sun Belt space and up the East Coast. And I think some of those are land is becoming scarce, right? Historically, the United States, we've had an abundance of land because we're such a large land mass. And so I'd like to ask you a little bit about data that we can look at to understand how that's impacting us. And then the other one is demographics, right? Obviously, the Sun Belt states do well with retirees after they are done working in urban areas that had employment, and they can then live in areas like Florida, California, where it's a little bit warmer and better climates. But we skew the data on demographics in two ways. One, the when we talk about things like millennials, baby boomers, those segments are not consistent segments, right? The baby boomer is the largest number of years, and it is in fact no longer the largest generation if you standardize over 5 years, 10 years. And then after the boomers, we've backfilled the demographics with immigration.
Mhm.
And so we're not, if you look at birth rates, you're really skewing the population spreads. And I don't think we as a nation culturally understand where our populations are and what's happening and the shifting that's going on and who really is our largest segments of the population.
Is
Yeah,
it?
I think that's,
Yeah, go ahead, George.
oh no, please, Peggy.
Oh, I was just wondering if are we looking at that as part of the housing shortage?
Absolutely. And I often do mention that our official immigration statistics show immigration declining, but I don't think any of us believe that's what's actually happening. We're experiencing a huge increase in immigration. And because it's undocumented, we don't know the degree, but qualitatively, 100%, Jonna, we know that we have very large amounts of immigration. Claudia Sam was just speaking about that. Saw an article earlier today pointing out how immigration is impacting unemployment rates. And she's saying, we can't just apply her rule to the states. I don't know if I should back up Sam rule, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're getting deep into macroeconomics. You asked me about immigration. So yeah, it's huge. Certainly our country is shifting. Why?
Did somebody ask why?
That might be in George's background. Um, Yeah, so how can we look at the data instead of using things like millennials and baby boomers, and how can we how can we use data to help us understand the problems so that we can formulate the solutions when it comes to housing?
I would say again, without solid numbers, it's hard to say exactly how to let the data lead us in the right direction. We already know we have a huge housing crisis, and at least qualitatively, we know it's probably even worse than it looks because with the influx of immigration, we are probably going to need even more than 1.5 million homes a year.
Hmm.
I should say units again, because that has multifamily and single family. Now, actually, here I got to back up because you also asked about land and land usage. Well, without a doubt, we are, relatively speaking, running out of land. We're still more sparsely populated than much of the world. We have seen a lot of multifamily construction, particularly since the Great Recession, and we're going to have to see more of that. In Europe, you see a lot of row houses and apartments, and we've just been very lucky with this wide spread out population that we have so many detached single family dwellings. That's going to change.
Now, what's changing? Lots of people have RVs now. They live in the RVs and they park in RV places, so they have a house they drive around.
Yeah,
That'll help, but those are usually retirees, and it's the younger people that need the housing.
right. Yeah, I mean, I could be happy living on my boat if I was single, but
For
Yeah,
not the case for most people. For
for a time, right?
a
Until
time, that's true.
you get to the point where you need assistance, and it's very hard to take care of somebody in an RV, right? They have to transition to some type um, of more similar to a single level dwelling. And I don't
Yeah,
know for the future. I think that's going to become an issue when all these people need to come out of RVs and into flat dwelling or apartment buildings with elevators, right? That was something we
right.
did do in the mid-century was build high-rise, or 4, 5, 6 story multi-unit with apartment buildings with elevators so that you could be accessible.
But yeah, senior living is another great topic for discussion.
yes, it is. Yep. And we know people that are going in and buying houses, which it doesn't help the situation in one sense, but in the other sense, they'll make it like 4 or 5 and maybe 6 bedrooms. So there'll be 6 people, different people that could live there, and that could open up some of that housing if they weren't living with their children. So that's
Yeah,
senior
for
living.
sure.
Plus, there's senior living being built all over the United States right now. I
Yeah,
know.
so you got the residential senior living, very interesting trend for those that have the cash.
Yeah.
It's a nicer way to deal with that phase of your life. You've also got Airbnbs. That's another demographic trend. They're eating into the hotel share at the same time they're eating up the very few units that we have. Not against it. Sorry, some of you probably have Airbnb, but it's we got a lot of things going on at the same time.
How do you see it eating into the hotel business?
Uh, sure. I mean, I think the hotels are in some cases closing, having poor occupancy, sometimes selling to redevelopers who are turning the hotel to multifamily. I mean, it's difficult time.
I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. With my project, I've had more people try to talk me into turning my hotel into something else. And I'm like, no, I need to have a hotel. Sorry. You know, and I can see, I mean, even in my town, the age is getting older, so there's more people who are 55 and older than there are, kids. And they need housing, and I get that. So I'm trying to look for other solutions too.
But
And
they
not
could
my
live in a hotel room.
they could. And maybe that will be what ends up happening. I don't know.
In the 20s, people did that all the time. They lived in a hotel room. I don't know what they did for food. I think they had set it up that it had 2 rooms and actually lived there with a living room and I don't know, a hot plate or what. I wasn't around then to know. I just watch old movies. And maybe that just happened in the movies, who knows? Yeah, so the other thing I was thinking about, and it's not exactly housing, but it's future savings, whether people, so we have all this housing that's eventually going to be available as we move forward because of inflation, because of the GMP, everything goes up. Are people thinking about what the future is going to cost, particularly when they are going to be retiring? Are they looking at, I don't even know if there's something on Google to do this. It's just kind of came to me when I started talking to people about in your IRA, for instance, do you know how much money you need? So when you get ready to retire, the money is there and you can have it invested so you never have to touch the principal. And it will earn money because you've always got that inflation. I don't know that that's going to stop. When I was in college in the 70s, a 8-ounce glass of beer was 25 cents. I'm going to guess it's not even close to that now. I didn't drink beer then. I don't drink beer now. But I bet I know a glass of wine costs 16 bucks. So I would bet beer somewhere a little less expensive than that. But if you look at over that 40, 50-year period, that's the inflation we're talking about. Are people prepared to have a place to live in their retirement and to have the money they need so they can live comfortably? Now, I don't know if that comes into any of your data or not, but I just thought might be a good subject.
Well, it's huge how much you have to save, considering that inflation is eating such a hole into people's savings, and considering that the reported inflation rate may be quite an underestimate of what's actually going on. It's not easy.
Yep.
And
You mean when you don't count food or utilities or gasoline?
right, that could be a problem because people actually buy these things, Peggy.
Every
What
day.
does the government expect us to do?
So I don't know how to advise people on that right now, but I think that it's something I need to take on. You don't need to necessarily, although I think with what you do for a living, you do need to, I mean, it's not a bad thing to offer people who are moving in to talk to them about this, or particularly if they want to move out.
Well, here's another angle: is we don't know what growth will look like in the future. It used to be people would count on 12% returns from the stock market, and I don't think we can grow like that in the future, uh, considering that growth is probably going to decline slowly in coming decades. That number required for a comfortable retirement may go up. Well, here's another interesting thing from the news. Somebody took pictures in California just before and just after the minimum wage increase, took pictures of fast food prices. And it was interesting that just overnight, literally overnight, that you could see maybe a 10% or I'm sorry, 10 cent increase, 15-cent increase in the price of a hamburger. Talking about beer, for example, famous joke involving J.P. Morgan back long before the 1970s says, Hayes orders a beer and says, hey, who wants a beer? Everybody says yes. He says when J.P. Morgan has a beer, everybody drinks. They all drink, and then he puts down a dime. Think about that, a dime. He pays for his drink, and he says, when J.P. Morgan pays, everyone pays.
Good for him. That's great. I love it. Yeah. So I went to breakfast the other morning. We ordered, so 2 of us, we ordered one breakfast and split it. She had coffee and I had water. $35 for
Yeah,
breakfast.
that's
Like
right.
$35 plus tip. So figure $42 for breakfast. I mean, what happened
Right.
to $3.50,
We can go
$10?
a lot of directions with that. Yeah, farmland becoming more scarce, and also farming practices under scrutiny. Uh, was it maybe 2 years ago? Sri Lanka had a huge food crisis because they outlawed chemical fertilizers. They thought they were going to go organic overnight. And I'm not against organic or electric cars or anything that's new, but when people try and do things overnight and try to do it for political reasons, the government had to fall and people had to suffer. People starved to death. I mean, there are consequences of these political actions. So, all over the world, whether it's us taking up farmland to grow ethanol, which is really a net energy loser, it's not adding to our energy security, or outlawing or putting farming practices under scrutiny or under pressure. Yes, we're seeing that throughout the entire economic food chain, as it were.
Mm, we are. And I drove up to San Francisco from LA a few months ago, and we have a lot of land not being used for anything. And some of it's livable and some of it isn't, but it's far away from the MSAs. People don't want to live far away unless we create new ones, unless we create new big cities in
Mhm.
those areas. And I don't know if that's going to happen, but here again, linear thinking is growing out from the downtown area rather than creating a whole new city somewhere else would be critical thinking. Yes, Jonna. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts? This is a really interesting subject. We all have places to live right now. Do you know people that don't? Other than the 100,000 living on our streets in LA? Jonna, go ahead.
Um, my family has always been in the middle class, sometimes at the bottom of the middle class and sometimes higher up in the middle class, but, never in the abject poverty, never in the category of the wealthy. But one of the things that my family has done, and I think a lot of middle class families has done, have used the equity of their home to secure credit. And as this land gets scarcer and scarcer, and people move to apartment buildings, they don't own them. I think that form of credit and wealth potentially dries up, and if they don't do something to offset it, we could be heading in a direction similar to, I think, what Peggy was referring to in the 1920s, when a lot of people lived in shared housing and didn't necessarily own.
Yeah.
I
What? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
think that's a real warning sign that as people who deal in multifamily, maybe we should consider exit strategies that include something similar to Europe, like flats or condo or something like that. I don't know. Your thoughts?
Well, here to just to extend Peggy's idea of how were people living in the 1920s, we had boarding houses where people would share a bathroom and they would have some shared cooking services, come downstairs to eat. Uh, we decided we weren't going to do that. Well, that's back when land was very plentiful, and we did various things. We had the government build housing, and well, that didn't really work. But now we have a voucher system and subsidy system that we use to try to generate uh, low income housing. Well, here, maybe I'll take your question in that direction if you don't mind. Uh, we all have this question in our mind: how do we build the lower income housing? But one of the things that I think people have neglected to see is that all of our housing needs are really connected. When developers build, they're building Class A. Why? Because it makes sense. That's where the numbers work. Well, every time Class A is built, it puts pressure not just on Class A, but on Class B and even Class C. So one of the things that I think we can do is those of us who do understand the housing industry is to try to go out and educate people and say that these luxury homes or these Class A apartments, that's not really just housing for the rich. It actually is impacting the affordability of housing across the spectrum. So it looks like Christina has a question.
Yes, Christina.
It was for the going back to retirement and properties and investment. I was wondering your thoughts on IULs, like index universal life funds, and like that being a way to secure retirement, because that would be protection for the property that moves with yeah, so I was just wanted to know your thoughts on IULs and
Yeah, life insurance is very interesting. There's a lot of things you can do with it. The index, for those that may not be fully uh, up to speed on it, is that it's going to go up with the stock market, but then they give you some downside protection. I mean, regardless of what you use to generate, I'm not sure exactly where you're going with that, but you can use this to generate capital
I
that you
don't
can
know, the
use.
question was there and then like it went, I could have wrote it down, sorry.
No worries, no worries. Well, yeah, I mean, it's one of the many wealth management tools, and I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, there are other things you can do, like private banking too. You uh, establish a private banking relationship as a high net worth individual, and sometimes you can leverage your stocks and find additional some value there. I mean, the interesting thing with life insurance is people always say, "Well, why does it work?" Well, the life
Like
insurance
mortgage
company.
protection, going back to like the mortgage and like the land, and like we're talking about like mortgage and protection and protecting like retirees or like retirement.
Oh yeah, right, sure. I mean, you can always dip into the policy, but why does the company let you do that? Of course, is because they've got the death benefit. That's their collateral, so they know that even if you don't pay it back, I mean, unlike the bank, who they can look at, you can underwrite somebody, you can look at all of their finances, but those insurance companies are really the only ones that have 100% chance, 100% likelihood of being paid back because they can always just keep your death benefit.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, there are many tools. I mean, I think that's a fine way to go. I hope people have a good. I just hope people don't invest in annuities. That's the only thing I want to say to you today.
And what is it about annuities?
What I don't like is the fact that a lot of the money just goes to sales. And they're really putting high pressure on people that are not very highly sophisticated when it comes to finance. And a lot of the money ends up going then to the sales force, as opposed to if you just bought yourself a pretty decent bond portfolio, for example, that in most cases you would do better with a reasonable mix of stocks and bonds. Of course, the one case in which that's not true is if you happen to be extraordinarily long lived, in which case an annuity might start to make sense. There's very few people, statistically speaking, that are ever going to make out through buying an annuity. I mean, unless you do it right.
It's true, it's true. But people are making it to 100 now. So we are at the
Yes.
top of the hour. We have like a minute. Does anybody have one last question before we thank our amazingly brilliant speaker? No comment or okay, great. Well, George, thank you so much for being here. I hope you will come back again. It was an amazing presentation. Very, very lots of statistics and lots of information. And I hope those of you who were here go back and watch it again for where you had questions and really take a look at the different slides and figure it out for what you are looking for in your lives and your prosperity. So thank you, George.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. I appreciate it. This is my second time. Love to come back again. Just let me know, Peggy.
We'd love to have you again.